Today's topic of our little sewing adventure is pants. And I planned to make 3 different pants for each of the character. The finished results will be cargo pants for Sutton, high-waisted Marlene pants for Barbie, and somewhat fitted leggings for Frankie. We get to this later. For the basic pattern, you need at least 3 measurements. The width of the waistband, the crotch, and the length from the waistband to the foot. If you already know how to sew, these can be enough, but to make the construction a bit easier, we will take a lot more. Though most dolls have molded on underwear or seam lines from the casting, we can take advantage of that. Measuring a doll has to be rather precise, because obviously in such a tiny scale, half a centimeter is already a lot of difference. A tape measure may have problems in certain areas, for example, the waist. So, using a thread or a ribbon and measuring that out is a lot easier. Let's get into more detail with the waistband. Most of the time you hear measure the waist and the hips, which means the slimmest part of the upper body, which is the waist, and the widest part, which is the hips, taking in account where your behind curves out the most. The waistband sits in between in most designs, somewhere around the hip bone. For the very basic pattern, I like to place it on the line where the molded on underwear is. Here you take 2 measures, one for the back, one for the front. Sometimes they are the same, but not always. To make sure you got it right, you can measure the whole circumference. If back and front added to each other give you the same number, you're on a good way. In the same way, you measure the hip circumference, because this is the widest part of the body. We have to get more width in the pattern too. To measure the crotch, you start at the front, where you took the measurement from the waistband, and go in between the legs, over the back again to where you measured the waistband on the back. You can break this down again, this time into 4. Waistband to hip, hip to in between the legs, in between the legs to hip back, and hip back to waistband back. The last 2 measurements will be the outside of the leg, from waistband to the foot, and the inside of the leg from in between the legs to the foot. Of course, you can shorten the length to wherever you want it, but for my examples, I show you the whole process. Now, to drawing the pattern. We first take care of the front. To give you some guidance, you can draw a center line with your measurement from the waistband to the foot and mark the length from waistband to hip on it. Or only draw this measurement, so waistband to hip. You now take half of the measurement from your front waistband and draw in a line that is teeny tiny bit curved at the end in a 90-degree angle. For the hip measurement, you do the same. Now again, you have the waistband to foot length that you place from the waistband over the hip in a slight curve and then straight down. To take the curve around the crotch into account, you now take your measurement from hip to in between the legs. You can take your doll as a reference on how strong the curve needs to be. Its length, obviously, is your measurement. From here, you take the inside of the leg measurement and go down in a curve. If you drew the help line, you aim to meet it quite soon. To be extra, you now can measure from the middle of the waistband to the middle of the hip to the bottom of the pants. Again, using the waistband to foot measurement. Drawing a curve between these 3 points will give you the final hem. For the back of your pattern, it is the same steps. Now you can cut out the pieces and have a pattern for straight fit pants. Let's alter them for each doll. Sutton will get some cargo pants. Most of them stay closer in the upper regions and get looser to the bottom. To give him a bit more movability, I make the crotch area a tiny bit longer and make the legs a bit wider. But there is not that much to change. For body, we need to add some stuff to the top to make it high-waisted. For that, instead of taking your measurements from the waistband, you take them from the waist. So the waist will be your waistband. Then you can just draw the pattern as with the main basic pattern. The legs need to flare out quite a lot, what is quite easy for the outer leg. At the inner one, you should start some centimeters away from the crotch, so that you still have this curve going on that leads to the leg. Now to Frankie. To make the pants more tight, you need more measurements. The thickest part of the thigh, the thinner part of the knee, the thickest part of the lower leg, and the ankle, each of them as circumference. To know where to put them, you should measure the distance from waistband to each point as well. Now the helpline comes in hand again. Drawing in the points gives you an idea where to put your measurements. Take half of each one and mark them by drawing a curved line between them. You get the close-fitted leg. If you plan to stuff a top into the waistband, you should take it in account now. Add roughly half a centimeter in total to it, and you should be good to go. I never used patterns with a seam allowance in it. I always marked the line where I have to sew. It is the easiest for me, but if you want to add seam allowance to the patterns, you obviously have to do that now. I can't give you a lot of advice for it because I never do it. Now you can take your pieces and transfer them to your fabric. Some fabrics have different sides. On printed one, you see the pattern mainly on the right one. Satin, for example, has a shiny and a more matte side, where the shiny one is mostly the one you want on the outside. These are often referred as left and right side of the fabric. Left referring to the one you want inside the garment, right referring to the one on the outside. Sometimes it just comes down to personal preferences which side you will use. You're totally allowed to use the matte side of a satin. It really depends on your taste, and if you have a project where this matte side would be perfect, just use it. To avoid confusion, especially when you are a beginner, you should screw the saving fabric aspect and outline the front, flip it over and trace it again. Because you can get confused, and if you do it this way, you clearly have the right leg and the left leg next to each other and know which is which. If you try to puzzle it somewhere, you can accidentally flip over the pattern again and have two left legs or two right legs. Right legs. So do it as easy as you can. Though we have a quite small scale, the waste of fabric is not that much. You can mark the back and front pieces as well by stitching a bit of thread at the top of one or cutting out a little bit in the seam allowance. Of course, each version has different steps in its construction. For the purpose of this video, I try to show you a basic way on how to assemble the pieces. If you want to add stitched on details or pockets, now is the time for it. Everything that won't interfere with your seams should be added now. Here are 3 ways to do the typical pockets of the front of the jeans. First, just stitch them on as a kind of embroidery. 2 curved lines next to each other give you a halfway decent effect. The crotch flap thing that hides the zipper can be done like this as well. 2. Put a piece of fabric on the right side of your pattern piece. It should be big enough to cover the line where you want to sew the pocket. Then stitch them together. Cut away the part above the seam, so the axis where the pocket entrance will be. Then you can flip over the newly attached fabric to the inside of the pants or pattern piece. And need to replace what you cut away with another piece of fabric. Pin that straight on. It should be big enough that you can draw the cutaway rest of the pattern onto it again. Top stitch the 3 layers in place. Redraw your pattern, and you have false pockets that look more realistic than the only stitched on ones. And of course, third, you can make these pockets usable. I never really understand why dolls need usable pockets, but if you decide your doll should have one, this is the way I do them. I would do them. You start in the same way as with the second example, by pinning a piece of fabric to the right side. This time you need to make sure that it extends down deep enough to give you the pocket size you want. It can't be bigger than the basic pattern piece. Sew the curved line, cut away the excess, and flip it over. This time you top stitch it now. Then you take a piece of fabric that is big enough to cover the whole pocket and the missing pattern piece. Attach this to the pocket and redraw your pattern. If you want to secure it a bit more, you can stitch along the lines of your pattern into the seam allowance. So this should give you usable pockets. If you want to do back pockets, you can do them now as well. For these, take a piece of fabric and hem one edge. Then pin it into the shape you want and pin that onto the pattern piece. Just secure it with a round of top stitching on the not hemmed edges. Of course, you can just embroider them as well. The next step, which is the first step for everyone who don't want to make pockets, is placing the corresponding back and front pieces of each leg onto each other with the right sides facing each other and stitch them together. To make the front look neat and nice, the pants will be closed at the back. Depending on the kind of pants, you either stitch the front crotch seam together or you fold one of them in and place them on top of the other to get a similar effect as with the pockets. If you want to add other pockets, like ones at the legs, as with the pants, for certain, you should do that now. Here I have 3 options as well. One is doing it like the back pockets. Second is adding a flap on top. The pocket is the same as before, but you take a smaller piece of fabric that has the same width, hem the shortest sides and one of the long ones, fold the last one over and attach it to the pant. Third, fake pockets again. Take a long piece of fabric, fold it over once, then fold that onto the right side of the pocket. Stitch it on. Next, you pin the 3 raw sides to the back, pin it to the pant, and stitch it on all 4 sides. This gives you a similar look to the pockets with the flap, but closed. The next step is to hem the legs as well as the top. In case you want to add a real waistband, a rectangle of fabric will do. Stitch it on to the outside, then flip it over and stitch it to the inside. Now you can close the back crotch seam up to the hip marking if you have a non-stretchy fabric, or completely if it has a good stretch. To finish this area, I normally just zigzag one side and then fold the other one inside once. The seam allowance gives you some space to add closures. The very last step is closing the inner leg seam in one go. Now you should take the time to cut away any excess thread, something I nearly never do. After that, you can turn them. To give it more of the illusion of real pants, you can add a button, or the studs you see sometimes. A lot of things can work for that. With some glue you can attach whatever you like. Now you only need to decide on the closures. Velcro is an option, snaps, hooks and eyes, or just stitching it close. What is my preferred method. But for the sake of showing it, I use plastic snaps this time. One last bonus step. You can add wear and tear by either cutting into the fabric and then sanding it a bit, or by just sanding it. On white, you don't see it that well, but on jeans it would make the area look lighter. And with that, our pants sewing adventure is done. Please let me know in the comments below if what I did here was understandable enough, and if I should continue the tutorials this way, or if you want something else. Basically, these tutorials are for you. And if you need more information or information's in a different way, just let me know. I try to make these videos as obvious as possible for my point of view. But I already can so it's sometimes a little bit hard to really know, did I get all the information you need? So if something is missing, just let me know. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope this was useful for you. And we'll see us in another video. Bye.